All right, good evening. This is Chair Justin Cooley, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would Deputy City Clerk Megan Wilbanks please call roll?
Commissioner Flores?
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here.
Commissioner Khan?
Here.
Commissioner Munoz-Morris will be absent tonight. Commissioner Tolley?
Here.
Vice Chair Houghton?
Here.
Chair Cooley?
Here. All right, that brings us to item 2, public comment for items not on the agenda. At this time, we will hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
We have a couple members that wish to comment tonight, but they're for the public hearing item.
Okay, great. Thank you. That brings us to item 3, consent. The only item on the consent calendar is consideration of our minutes from January 22nd, 2025. From that meeting, before we vote, do we have any commissioners who have comments on the consent agenda? Do I have a motion and a second to approve consent?
I'll move to approve the minutes from the past meeting.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. That brings us to item 4, our public hearing. Any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. In our public hearing tonight, the item before us is to review proposed amendments to Title 16, Subdivision Regulations, and Title 17, Zoning Regulations of the city's municipal code. Would Assistant Planner Ethan Estrada please present the staff report?
Chair Cooley, if I may, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the item tonight. I'm Teresa McClish. I'm a principal planner for the city for housing and homelessness response. And I wanted just to briefly take a moment to introduce this item. The draft ordinance presents an opportunity to address some of the recent and extensive state legislation pertaining to housing and to help ensure a municipal code is consistent with state law and address some other needed zoning clarifications. We have received some really good feedback so far from the public, and some of it has precipitated some changes that have been delivered to you in agenda correspondence, and staff will review that in more detail for you this evening. We would also like to note that given extensive state law changes, we intend this draft ordinance to be the first of probably 2 steps in the coming months to amend the zoning ordinance and make sure that the city is continuing to remove barriers to housing and still provide for balancing other city goals whenever possible. So we look forward to your consideration of the draft ordinance tonight and hearing additional public comment, and offer if there are other ideas that come up that we may not be able to immediately tackle in this ordinance. We're happy to listen and review these suggestions and plug into future upcoming updates. And with that, I'll give it over to Ethan Estrada, Assistant Planner, to start the presentation.
All right, thank you, Teresa. Good evening, commissioners. Again, my name is Ethan Estrada, and with my colleague David Amini, Housing Coordinator for CDD, we will be presenting staff's report on the proposed amendments to Titles 16 and 17 of the city's municipal code. Staff's recommendation tonight is for your commission to adopt the draft resolution with staff modifications, which recommends that the City Council introduce and adopt an ordinance amending Titles 16 and 17 of the city's municipal code regarding state legislative updates on accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units, and urban lot splits, and clarifications to regulations for affordable housing projects. There are 2 alternatives to this recommendation that your commission may pursue. The first being to modify the proposed amendments to the subdivision and zoning regulations, so long as said modifications are consistent with state law. The second being the continuation of this item if additional information is needed. If you do continue this item, we ask that you provide staff with specific direction as to what is needed. So the proposed amendments we'll discuss tonight can be organized into two categories. The first being amendments that ensure the city's municipal code is compliant with state law. This includes the incorporation of provisions introduced through new state legislation, as well as amendments to address inconsistencies between existing state law and the municipal code. The second category contains miscellaneous items that require amendments to the municipal code to streamline review processes, provide clarification on affordable housing projects, and provide a definition for car shared vehicles. Beginning with accessory and junior accessory dwelling units, there are two relatively new pieces of state legislation that require amendments to the city's zoning regulations. First, we have Senate Bill number 477, which reorganized state ADU and JADU law into its own chapter in the government code. This made any reference to state ADU law in the zoning regulations obsolete. Staff is proposing numerous changes to either refer to state law more generally as to avoid needing to update the code substantially each time a provision of state law is changed, or to refer to the correct government code section when absolutely necessary. We also had Senate Bill number 1211. This introduced a handful of changes to state ADU law. This included prohibiting local agencies from requiring the replacement of uncovered off-street parking spaces if demolished to construct or convert a structure into an ADU, as well as allowing up to 8 detached ADUs on properties with an existing multifamily structure, given that the number of ADUs does not exceed the number of existing dwelling units on the lot. This update includes amendments incorporating the provisions of SB 1211 into the zoning regulations. In September of last year, CDD received a letter from California's Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD, outlining 13 inconsistencies between state ADU law and the city's zoning regulations. To provide some context, over 100 cities in California received a similar letter, as HCD has indicated their intent to more strictly enforce state ADU law, which includes the review of municipal codes for compliance. This letter requested that CDD amend the city's zoning regulations as identified in the letter, or provide to HCD how these regulations already complied. CDD provided a response to this letter, but has yet to receive correspondence back. Many of the amendments included in tonight's update address items identified by HCD, including an expansion of the list of zones that ADUs are allowed in, references to state law to account for potential exceptions to certain standards such as maximum ADU size and the number of ADUs allowed, clarifications on procedural requirements for the review of ADU applications, and more. In addition to the amendments addressing new state legislation in HCD's letter, staff identified 2 miscellaneous ADU items requiring amendments to the city's zoning regulations. For the first item, staff has proposed an amendment to remove the requirement that ADUs match the primary residence in style, form, and materials. Based on community feedback, these requirements are subjective in nature, can be challenging to implement, especially in a ministerial review process, and do not always result in the best building design. For the second item, staff identified instances in state law where the conveyance and sale of an ADU separate from the primary residence is allowed. The city's subdivision and zoning regulations currently prohibit this in any instance. This update includes amendments to reference these exceptions in state law. Moving on to the topic of urban lot splits, with the passage of Senate Bill number 9 in 2021, the city added Chapter 16.15 to its subdivision regulations, incorporating the provisions of this bill into the municipal code. At its most basic level, this chapter allows a property owner to subdivide a single-family zone lot into 2 new lots that are relatively equal in size and allows each lot to contain up to 2 residential dwellings. With that said, there are 3 new pieces of state legislation that were passed impacting state law for urban lot splits. First, we have Senate Bill number 450, which introduced new provisions to Government Code sections 65852.21 and 66411.7 pertaining to urban lot splits as they exist in the subdivision regulations now. Primarily, this bill removes the city's ability to deny an application for a housing development project associated with an urban lot split on the basis that a written finding is made the project would have a specific adverse impact on the physical environment. And to clarify, the city still retains the ability to deny such a project on the basis that a written finding is made that it would have a specific adverse impact on public health and safety. So two different options there. This bill also provides updates to the procedural requirements associated with urban lot splits, and tonight's update introduces amendments that would include those provisions. Senate Bill number 684 introduces an urban lot split system for multifamily zone properties, similar to what we have for single-family zone properties. I'll discuss more of the specifics on this item in a moment, but on a basic level, this bill allows the subdivision of a multi-family zone property to create up to 10 new lots, as well as the subsequent development of up to 10 new dwelling units. And lastly, Senate Bill number 1123 altered some of the provisions of SB 684. Primarily, it extended eligible locations for an urban lot split under SB 684 to include vacant single-family zone properties, which we'll look at more closely momentarily. To more easily reference the two different types of urban lot splits allowed under state law, staff has proposed the terms minor and major urban lot splits. Specifically, urban lot splits pursuant to Government Code Sections 65852.21 and 66411.7, which were introduced under Senate Bill 9, will be referred to as minor urban lot splits. Urban lot splits pursuant to Government Code Sections 65852.28, 65913.4.5, and 66499.41, which were introduced under SB 684, will be referred to as major urban lot splits, which we'll use for the remainder of this presentation. To get into some of the key requirements regarding major urban lot splits, as I've already mentioned, major urban lot splits are allowed in multifamily zone properties. These properties must be less than 5 acres in size and substantially surrounded by urban uses. Major urban lot splits are also allowed in vacant single-family zone properties, but they must be no larger than 1.5 acres in size and also must be substantially surrounded by urban uses. A property subject to a major urban lot split may be subdivided to create up to 10 new lots, and the associated housing development project may create up to 10 new dwellings. The number of lots and dwellings are not mutually exclusive. For example, a property can be subdivided to create 5 new lots while still developing 10 new dwellings. However, each lot created through a major urban lot split must contain at least 1 dwelling. Each lot created by a major urban lot split must be no smaller than 600 square feet. If the property being subdivided is a vacant single-family zone property, the lots must be no smaller than 1,200 square feet. Regarding the housing development project associated with the major urban lot split, the average total area of floor space for all proposed dwellings shall not exceed 1,750 square feet. The housing development project associated with a major urban lot split cannot result in the demolition of affordable housing. This includes housing subject to a recorded covenant, ordinance, or law restricting rent levels to be affordable to persons and families of low, very low, and extremely low income. And lastly, major urban lot splits cannot be conducted on a lot established through a prior urban lot split. This applies to minor urban lot splits as well. Again, this was a list of key requirements that staff felt necessary to highlight in this presentation. There are additional requirements outlined in staff's report that we would be happy to discuss if needed. For now, I will allow David Amini to discuss some of the miscellaneous amendments included in this update.
Thank you, Ethan. As part of the update that is before the Commission tonight, there are several miscellaneous amendments and corrections to the zoning regulations based on HCD and community feedback. Starting off with our urban lot split ordinance, the parking requirement can be waived if there is a car share vehicle located within 1 block of the property. There has been some confusion about what constitutes a car share vehicle. Staff has added a clear definition for car share vehicles to clarify that a car share vehicle is part of a larger fleet and parked at a dedicated parking space. Staff has also identified, based on community feedback, a potential barrier to ADUs that involve the addition and/or conversion of existing residential structures to create ADUs. Currently, in order to take advantage of this provision, property owners must first secure a building permit to add on additional space, construct the space and get the permit finalized, then apply for a separate permit to convert the now existing space into an ADU. City staff seeks to streamline this process by adding the following language to Chapter 17.86 of the zoning regulations. Based on community feedback, staff sent out agenda correspondence to adjust this language from what was presented in your staff report. The current revision of this language removes the identified barrier to ADU production by making these ADU conversions a one-step process instead of a two-step process. The revision to the chapter states the following. Building permit applications that propose the expansion or alteration of an existing single-family or multifamily dwelling or the conversion of existing space within a single-family or multifamily dwelling for the purpose of creating an accessory dwelling unit or junior accessory dwelling unit are permissible under this chapter. Said expansion or alteration to an existing single-family or multifamily dwelling shall be consistent with the city's objective design standards and any applicable zoning regulations. The number of ADUs within the existing or proposed converted space of a multifamily dwelling shall not exceed 25% of the existing number of multifamily units. The provisions of this section do not apply to new construction multifamily dwellings. This language clarifies what is allowed per state law and allows property owners to expand or alter an existing single-family or multifamily dwelling to create an ADU, provided that it is compliant with the city's zoning regulations. It is important to note that this provision applies only to existing dwellings and not new construction projects. Staff also received feedback from our affordable housing developer community regarding the difficulty in providing commercial space within supportive housing projects to satisfy the mixed-use requirement in commercial zones. To provide clarity, staff is adding a note to ensure that supportive housing projects in a commercial zone are not required to be a mixed-use development, except for those that are in our downtown core. The proposed zoning code amendments before the Commission tonight are consistent with a variety of policies in the city's housing element. This includes policies that encourage housing production, infill development, and increased density across our housing continuum. I want to note that the Commission received staff agenda correspondence regarding the ADU streamlining provision that I mentioned earlier. In addition to the correction of some miscellaneous errors, I will read these changes into the record this evening for clarity. Staff is revising this section regarding the JADU owner occupancy requirement. Instead of the language stating as required by state law, staff is revising this section to state as provided by state law. This is intended to refer to the several exceptions to the owner occupancy requirement provided by state JADU law. Staff is similarly revising this section regarding JADUs. Instead of stating as required by state law, this section is again revised to state as provided by state law. This allows for any future changes to state JADU law regarding covenant agreements to be accommodated in this section of the zoning regulations. Lastly, staff identified a clerical error referring to the incorrect chapter that provides the car share definition. Staff is revising this section to refer to the correct chapter, which is section 16.26.065. So staff's recommendation tonight is to adopt the draft resolution, which recommends that City Council introduce and adopt the ordinance inclusive of the 4 revisions provided in staff agenda correspondence and read into the record this evening. That concludes our presentation tonight, and I now open the floor to any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'll take it back to the Commission. Any questions for staff at this point? Go ahead.
Under the urban subdivision, it says a single-family residence can be subdivided into 2 lots. Is there a minimum size of the 2 lots, or is the original lot a minimum size?
I can find this section specifically.
Thank you.
Real quick, but there is a minimum lot size requirement for new lots created through a minor urban lot split. Let's see if I can find. Do you remember that? I don't remember it off the top of your head.
It probably would follow the size of a minimum single-family residential lot right now already, I would imagine.
Yeah.
While we're verifying, I believe it's 600 square feet, but
okay.
I'm going to verify that. If you can, please proceed with some other questions, and we can
Thank
come
you.
back to that.
I appreciate that.
I believe that's for the urban lot splits under SB 9.
Any other questions for staff? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a general question. So all these directives that are coming from the state, we really have no choice but to comply with them if we want to continue being a city, right?
So we've received correspondence from HCD outlining the deficiencies in our code, particularly relating to ADUs. And they've asked that the city provide a response that shows that we're making efforts to change our code to meet those requirements. And they've sent this out to about over 100 different cities. They've also opened a new housing accountability unit, which is intended to go after cities that aren't making these changes to comply with the state law.
And am I correct in reading it? Part of what's at stake too is a designation as a pro-housing city. Is that correct?
That's possible, yes. We have been identified as a pro-housing city just based on our housing element and kind of some unique codes that we've implemented locally. And that could be in jeopardy for not meeting these basic state law requirements.
Okay, so there is some kind of enforcement arm that's being gathered or that's going to be mobilized to really follow up on this. And there was a deadline. We met the deadline with our response. It looks like out of the 13, we're complying with 12, and on number 13, we're saying, well, we're already good there, basically, right? Okay. I'm curious if there's anything, given that we have to do these things, is there anything in there we really don't like? Is that a fair question?
Not really. Some of the language that we're working with is challenging. Some of the intent isn't super clear that we have to decipher from what's coming from the state. And so, we're doing our best, and we're complying as best we can with incorporating these new laws into our code. And so, but every detail about what we're seeing and hearing, it's not really our position to whether we like it or not. We're just obligated to comply.
I guess what I would reframe that is, it seems like these are mostly consistent with our overall goals of increasing housing, increasing density, streamlining the process, and so on. And I don't know if we're getting in trouble for pointing this out, but is there anything in there that's really contrary to what our stated goals are? Nothing popped out for me. I was wondering if staff observed that there was any such language that was problematic. A pill we have to swallow,
I
so
don't
to speak.
think there was anything that we see as problematic. I just think, again, it's challenging when the state is basically blanketing the entire state of California with rules that apply equally to every jurisdiction, regardless of whether they're urban, rural, or other, the same way. So it has a different effect on those jurisdictions in terms of their character and what kind of development that can happen in those areas.
Okay, so there's 100 other meetings like this going on sometime around right now, and maybe they're asking that same question, getting a different answer. So, okay. And I just want to comment that I want to thank you guys for going through the detail on this, and to Director Tway, this must have taken a while, because all the state code numbers and our code numbers and cross-referencing, I don't know if I want to know how many person hours went into figuring this all out, but the summary that was provided at the end was what I was able to absorb mostly. And so thanks for doing all that pretty fine-grained detail work. So that's all I have for staff right now.
Any other questions for staff? I had a question very quickly. One of the things that caught my attention, and kind of the way I went through this, was I started with the HCD letter, and then the staff report, and then letter from Mr. Amini. There's some discussion there about potential limitations on short-term rentals, and it seems like there was a difference of interpretation between the state and the city. Could you kind of walk us through those distinctions?
Yeah, so the state law basically mandates it mandates that you cannot apply basically a short-term rental restriction to a JADU. We're kind of interpreting that a little bit differently, and also making the case to HCD that because our city is so impacted with housing needs, that imposing this requirement would remove housing stock from our city, particularly housing stock that is by nature affordable. A small JADU is going to be more affordable than maybe renting a house or something of that nature. So that's kind of our position that we've outlined to HCD, that we don't agree with that interpretation and intend to keep our restriction on short-term rentals for ADUs and JDUs.
Because if the city was forced to adopt that other interpretation, that would be a pretty big change to the city's short-term rental policy, correct?
Yeah, it would. There would be a change not only to the zoning regulations, but other kind of cascading effects of that.
Okay. All right, if there are no other staff questions at this point, or questions for staff.
Chair Cooley, I'll just circle back on the size limit. So the provisions under state law for subdivision that you were referring to for multifamily projects is 600 square feet. If it's property subject to a major urban lot split, and if it's in single family district, it would be 1,200 square feet.
All right, thank you. And with that, we will go to public comment.
Chair Cooley, if I may,
Sure.
real quickly. So I did want to respond to a question I received from a commissioner. The question was related to the minimum 30-day rental period. The question was, would that preclude an owner from leasing the property for an extended time to a tenant who in turn subleases the property to others? So the way that the code is written and sort of the intent there is that, yes, this would also prohibit that sort of subleasing situation. The state law authorizes us to require terms of longer than 30 days. So the idea here would be that in order to meaningfully sort of, enforce that would also address that subleasing issue.
All right. Public comment. Do we have any requests to speak?
Yes, we have 4 speaker cards so far, and if anybody else in the audience wants to turn one in, please do so now. I also want to give everybody a heads up. We have a new public comment timer up on the screen. You can see it's set at 3 minutes right now. We're working on configuring the sound controls for when it goes off, so don't be alarmed. It's a little loud. We're working on getting it turned down. So first speaker is going to be Eric VM, followed by Michael Clark, Emily Ewer, and Chris Allen.
And could someone please try to go over 3 minutes because I really want to hear this sound.
I'm a resident of San Luis Obispo. I live near Mitchell Park on Bouchon Street. And I have an R2 property where I have a project that is a 100-year-old garage with, it's a single family residence with a resident above it, and then I have next to it is a dilapidated garage. And so my intent is to take down that small garage, do an addition with an ADU on top that's to the existing single family. And so the 2-step process that is being resolved here to the single step is extremely helpful to my current project. And so I'm really appreciative of staff and the HCD for bringing forward these issues and for your commission to address them in the way they are. That's going to help me immediately in bringing forward a local or an infill downtown affordable ADU. There's one other issue that I'm encountering though in this that I think that I wrote to in my public comment letter, and that has to do with the fact that in order to build this ADU, the addition needs to be conforming, zoning code compliant. However, the existing structure, which is like 2 stories without any sort of second story step back, is legal non-conforming. And because of that legal non-conforming status, the current regulations require me to take director's action, which involves like fees around $2,000, 1 to 2 months review time, and then, the director's attention on a project that is like, I've gotten indication that there's no real grounds to deny that action. And so this is, I think, in aligning this movement from the 2-step to the 1-step process and allowing for the avoidance of the director's action for non-conforming, legally non-conforming existing structures where the addition will be conforming, that's kind of a 1-2 punch that's going to really help to accelerate. Because my feeling is, especially in older neighborhoods where there's likely lots of legal non-conforming homes, where this addition to ADU tool is now going to be available in a streamlined way, that people are going to be running into this non-conforming, legal non-conforming existing thing, which is going to have to cost additional money on the project and then take staff time and my time in the development. So if that is something that you can consider, and my request would be to recommend as part of your motion today to the council for staff to bring an ordinance update that addresses that specific issue. So thank you for your time, and I'll wait until.
Michael Clark.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Michael Clark. First, wanted to address one of the items that staff discussed and you had questions on, which is for junior ADUs and short-term rentals. One of the contingents of our community are seniors, and oftentimes seniors will resort to reverse mortgage or other means to keep their homes in their old age. So junior accessory dwelling units are restricted to owner occupancy in most situations, and that restriction obviously makes it so that, like, if you're a senior, if you're another person looking for additional income, it's a short-term rental in order to keep your home. It's actually a great benefit to contingents of our community. I also wanted to read to you something that comes from an earlier law. It's from AB 2221. And I think the opponents of that bill said it best in arguing that it goes too far in pushing a use that's meant to be accessory dwelling units, particularly in allowing ADUs within front setbacks. And again, that went into effect in 2022. So one of the laws that is on the discussion tonight is SB 477. The title of that bill was Unfinished Business. And what that bill did, or what it was described to do, is make technical, non-substantive, and non-policy changes to sections of law relating to housing. So part of what you need to understand is some of these considerations have been around for a while. I've been going through, depending who's counting, 5 or 6 denials and trying to create an ADU in our home in SLO, particularly as it pertained to placing a unit in the front setback. And most recently, HCD actually met with the city to go through how that restriction doesn't apply to 66323 units. And those are units that are like very cut and dry. There's very few restrictions that can be applied to them. And part of what I want to come here and suggest to you today, right, is those should really be a measure of last resort. As a community, we should probably encourage people to seek options that are within an ordinance that's more permissive, instead of relegating to those 66323 units. Because again, those are very objective, and there's very few restrictions that can be placed upon those. Thank you.
Emily Ewer, and then Chris Allen.
There you go. Good evening. My name is Emily Ewer. I am Senior Planner at Oasis Associates. As a local land use consultant, we've been involved in various ADU projects and are currently representing a couple multifamily development projects that include ADUs. Staff's correspondence and revision to Section 1786-24BC, the streamlining, provided some much needed clarity to that section. However, our discussion with staff and correspondence was to support and encourage the streamlining provision to encompass considerations for new construction. By acknowledging or allowing new development to achieve the ADU quantities allowed for existing development and those additions, proposed new construction projects, especially with attached ADUs, can be constructed efficiently with the same net results as construction of developments one day and then converting it the next. This is especially valid when the project's design and form is consistent with the underlying zoning regulations and does not utilize the allowances made for ADUs as it relates to setbacks, floor area ratio, coverage, and the development retains parking for those primary dwellings. While ADUs are generally exempt from any discretionary reviews, when ADUs are proposed with new development, that development is subject to the development and design reviews applicable to those primary structures. Development review provides staff and the decision makers with a level of discretionary authority and ability to condition projects to ensure that the development is consistent with the applicable zoning regulations. This review can ensure that the development is appropriate while accommodating and authorizing the ultimate development potential for those ADUs. To that end, we would request Planning Commission to consider further revisions to the ordinance to allow ADU quantities allowed for those conversions to be included in new construction. I also wanted to request a modification to section 178620B3C, the design standards, as it relates to building heights, specifically subsection A, which currently reads, in order to provide additional design options for accessory units, units that include creation of new square footage can be constructed up to 25 feet in height, consistent with the setback standards of Article 2, which is the development standards for each zone. Since ADUs are now allowed in a broad range of zones, we would request consideration for this section to be revised to allow the height of new construction consistent with that underlying zoning height. When those zone height standards are utilized, this would include upper story setbacks. By relying on the underlying zone setback standards, the development for the ADU and other proposed development areas would continue to be consistent with the zoning standards while allowing for greater design flexibility. This would be especially meaningful for upper floor ADUs and multifamily commercial zones. Thank you for your consideration.
All right, next speaker is Chris Allen, followed by Christina Pyers, and then Dustin Pyers.
All right. My name is Chris Allen. I am a local architect here in San Luis City, and I have personally undertaken about 100 or plus ADUs in our city or county. And so I've experienced the kind of inconsistency, I would say, of what our current ordinance resides in, and so I show appreciation to the staff that have undertaken kind of resolution to a lot of the inconsistencies. One thing that I don't think has been addressed and is something that I experience often enough to make comment on is the fact that, albeit trees exist on lots throughout the city of San Luis, what we have found is that the burden on the architect to get a permit approved on properties that have existing trees actually extends the permitting process so significantly in trying to get a tree removal permit that has actually been more of a hindrance than trying to navigate the ordinance itself. So I would recommend that there be some means in which to consolidate a tree removal permit into a more objective standard. Currently, it is almost a subjective approval. A arborist evaluates the existing tree that may or may not need to be removed, and then subjectively evaluates how many trees would then have to be replanted as part of the removal process. I think that there could be a consolidation of that concept into just a plant 4 trees if you're taking one out concept. Additionally, I think there was a comment made, at least in the current discussion of the ordinance with regards to bonuses. Other jurisdictions allow for what would be considered a bonus. In that process, I would imagine there could be an evaluation made of a submitted project in association to an ADU where 90% of the requirements are met and 10% may be of a restrictive realm. I think there could be an avenue to at least accept a 90% level approval and have there be some flexibility with some of these unique lots, especially ones that come with a historic nature associated to them. I think I don't want to reiterate some previous comments, but I do agree that there is a benefit in alleviating what could be the 16-foot height limit in transit-oriented communities when 16 feet doesn't necessarily allow for 2 stories. Allowing universally an 18-foot height limit may give some flexibility for some properties that don't necessarily have more room to go single story in that case. And that is all I've got. Thank you.
All right, Christina Pyers. Dustin Pyers is the final speaker.
On a recent developers roundtable, the question was asked on SB 1211 if where you could have up to 8 ADUs that have to be detached, whether the city was viewing that as detached from density units or detached from each other. And it seemed the city was potentially leaning towards they all had to be detached from each other. I just want to point out that in the definitions for 66323 units, it very clearly states that in multifamily dwellings that the ADUs can be attached to each other. So with that definition, it has to be detached from the unit, but it can be detached. They can be attached to each other. And I just, want to make sure that's clear before it gets further down the process into changing this verbiage. Also, I just wanted to mention the JADUs being able to be short-term rentals. We were lucky to get an ADU approved before that limitation of the 30+ days was put on. And what that meant for my family is we were able to take half of our home, a third of our home, and section it off as a short-term rental. We were able to afford to live in SLO. When that penciled correctly, we turned that into a 30+ unit. When that penciled correctly, we turned it into a long-term unit. It's now been a long-term unit. I've had the same tenant there for years. But the key is flexibility. When you have families and just people in general, in all different capacities and ages, trying to afford to live here, the key is flexibility. Flexibility leads to affordability. And when you say that it doesn't, that this specific thing with the JADU doesn't lead to that, I have to disagree. It absolutely leads to that. You're giving up a piece of your home. It's not like you're building a separate ADU. You're giving up a piece of your home. You're sacrificing so that you can afford to live here. Yeah, and then I will also say there are almost 500 cities in California, and we were part of that 25% that missed some of these things. So I hope we get it right this time.
All right, final speaker is Dustin Pyers.
Dustin Pierce, 1010 San Carlos Drive. Without kind of reiterating what everybody said, I would like to second that, especially in regards to the phasing. I think that's really important. I think essentially this looks like it's ready to be adopted, so I'm just kind of giving my support that you guys adopt this, with the exception that we do not try to alter the JADU short-term rentals. A lot of what my wife just said, it was very valuable to us as a family, and I feel like that flexibility gives people the option that I think will lead to just a better overall experience for most of the residents here. So other than that, I appreciate everybody's efforts in this and look forward to bringing a lot of projects to meet all these new codes. Thank you.
We had no further requests to speak?
No.
All right, last call. If anyone else wants to speak who hasn't, but I think actually everyone in the room has spoken. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Do we have any additional questions for staff?
Well, it'd be great to hear some responses from staff from some of the testimony tonight. That'd be great.
Yeah, I have some responses to the points that were brought up in the public comment. Regarding the comment that was made for the streamlining of the ADUs of converted space in multifamily dwellings to apply to new construction, this portion of state law is really intended only to apply to existing structures, and so going beyond that would definitely be a lot more permissive than what the state law provides. What we also find too is that there are existing ways for multifamily projects to provide increased density than what is allowed. A great example is our affordable housing incentives, whereby depending on the proportion of units, if you're to provide a few units that are deed restricted to low income or below, you can actually achieve increased density. And we've seen that employed successfully in a variety of projects. One project that comes to mind is Victoria Crossing, 2375 Victoria, by providing, I want to say 3 extra units of low-income housing. They were able to add essentially an additional floor. to the building and not have to provide the additional parking. So that's an incentive that we've seen work in real time, where for new construction multifamily projects, you can add density. And so we encourage using those incentives rather than using the ADU incentive, which is really targeted at taking existing buildings and adding that housing capacity. And then regarding the comment for the underlying zone standards to be allowed, particularly when it comes to height restrictions. Currently, how we have it proposed is that there's a 25-foot height restriction on ADUs. This is more permissive than the state law. The state law requires up to 18 feet for a detached ADU, and then 25 feet for an ADU that is attached to an existing multifamily structure. We're just saying 25 feet across the board. When we get into the underlying zone standards for R3 and R4 zones, these are really intended for larger new construction apartment buildings. So to apply those underlying zone standards with regards to height on an ADU, we don't see a lot of use cases where that would be necessary. But obviously, after the fact, we could explore that. So that's our rationale behind that comment. With regards to tree removal that were brought up for you tonight, the tree code is a different section of the code than the zoning regulations that are before the Planning Commission tonight. And there was also a comment related to there about heights. This update allows a 25-foot height across the board for ADUs. And regarding the comment about the detached ADUs on a multifamily property, our interpretation is that, yes, the ADUs can be attached to each other, but that structure has to be detached from the main structure. And that was kind of going back and forth up for discussion, but that's the interpretation that we've received of that law. I think that about addresses what's been brought up.
Could I ask a follow-up question about the 25-foot height limit? I didn't, maybe I'm just not reading carefully, but it seemed to me that the testimony from the public comment letter from Emily Ewer described a situation where the 25 feet wasn't available. And I didn't quite understand that. It was a little more nuanced than I was hoping for as I tried to read through this. Did I just misunderstand the public comment and your response?
I believe that comment was regarding the underlying standards in the R3 and R4 zones, which allows for a height of up to 35 feet. And so since our ordinance is restricting that to 25 feet, the comment was intended to just allow the underlying standards across the board. So to allow for a scenario where there would be an up to 35-foot height limit.
I didn't see that mentioned in her letter, but if you think you covered it, thank you.
Can I step on top of that? I was confused by that as well, because I thought this underlying business implied that you would have lower height limits in some underlying conditions, not higher, until the R3, R4 just entered the discussion here. So now, and I know that public comment's closed, but so I don't know how we get around that, but and Emily's like on the edge of her seat there. So do we have any better way to get around that or to understand?
So I can maybe clarify, what's meant by underlying zone is, for instance, in the R1 zone, there's a maximum height of 25 feet. It goes up to 35 in the R2. And then in our commercial districts, it goes up obviously higher, 45 in downtown at 50. So that's the base height standard for those different zone districts. And that's what's meant by underlying zone. Just to kind of reiterate, I think what David is saying is state law would allow up to 18 feet. We're being more permissive and going at 25 across the board. And for all ADUs, doesn't matter what zoning district we're talking about. And so that's just clarifying that, his response on that.
Okay, thanks.
And we believe that what Ms. Ewer was suggesting, that we just let it go with the underlying ADUs could go up to the 35 maximum as well. That's okay. And she's nodding yes. And we're proposing a 25-foot maximum. Okay.
And I think there would still be mechanisms if you wanted to go higher, you could pursue with for variances or direct action or something like that.
Correct. It just wouldn't be a ministerial process.
Okay, thanks.
At this point, on the less than 30-day rental period for junior ADUs.
We, in our HCD letter, and maybe we could pull that up and look at our responses to that and just give us a second on that. But the idea there is that the housing capacity that would be afforded through the JADUs, the city's, policies and goals to promote housing production and long-term housing for the community, allowing short-term rentals of those units wouldn't be in total alignment with that. And so that was basically the premise of our response to HCD on that our intent in terms of keeping that in place in our local jurisdiction, we believe that that is consistent with state law and is consistent with the intent of housing production.
Could I quickly ask Tyler, so junior ADUs are generally developed within a house, but there are some exceptions to that, or it can extend beyond the house. It can be new construction that connects in some way, but it always connects?
That's correct. It always would connect. There are some limitations on additions for access and other features, but I think I would refer to David or Ethan on the details about those.
And so the presumption in what you're bringing forward is that the sort of in-house ADUs, as I'll call them for a minute, really are going to be produced in such numbers that it would really kind of wash over the whole short-term housing market in negative ways for the community. Do we expect a lot of inside house ADUs at this point?
I'm not sure I understand, the question about washing out.
I think from public comment, there was a question raised that I read as there's a difference between junior ADUs and ADUs. And is there enough of a difference that it could impact whether we need a short-term rental ordinance that includes the junior ADUs or not?
Well, currently it's not allowed, and we're proposing to keep it that way.
I see. Okay. And it's not allowed because it could undermine the market in a way. Investors that flood in or something. I'm not quite sure how that works if it's in the house, but I hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Go ahead.
I just had one question on 16.15.020 I2. Easement, it says easements must be recorded before the final map can be approved. And I don't think that's how easements are generally handled when they're required with a map. I think it's generally required that the easement be fully prepared, signed, approved, presented, held by the city for simultaneous recording. But it gets messy if you record easements before a project's actually approved. So I think maybe that needs to be wordsmithed.
Thank you for that comment. I do agree with that. I think we can probably add some simple language there that could say something to the effect of, or I think adding language or concurrent with. So prior to or concurrent with might address that issue in that section.
Thank you.
If there are no further comments, anyone care to make a motion?
I have a few other questions. I was kind of waiting if we were going to have a discussion period before having a motion, but I wanted to make sure we addressed all the public comments that came in writing and in person here. So my little list here includes from Mr. Tricamo, do I have that right? And that addressed this owner occupancy requirement and then also a cheat sheet suggestion. And the cheat sheet's not going to be part of the municipal code, so it's probably not before us tonight. But is there anything to be said about this owner occupancy question that was put here? What's the status of JADUs requiring owner occupancy? I've heard this is not legal. I know it's very difficult to enforce. So what does staff have to say in response to that?
The owner occupancy requirement is a requirement of state law. So this update is to bring us best in alignment with state law. So we're just matching that.
Okay, so not only is it not illegal, it's required by state law. And as far as enforcement, is that a problem? Is that anything we really worry about?
I think it could. There for other projects that require owner occupancy, we have required an affidavit to be signed of owner occupancy. That's not something we're necessarily proposing now, but it may need to be explored if that becomes an issue.
Okay, and there's similar things that apply to affordable rentals and that sort of thing. So, okay. Then the height standards, I think we addressed. This two-step and streamline business has come up a couple of times from both Ms. Ewer and Mr. VM. This business about being able to add a conforming addition to an existing non-conforming with directors without having to go through director action. What do we think about that?
So the director's action requirement for non-conforming conditions is in a separate portion of the zoning regulations. It really gives us the staff time that's needed to analyze whatever the non-conforming condition may be. If it becomes an issue for these ADUs, as was kind of alluded to, it could be something that we revisit later. But currently there is a pathway for non-conforming structures to have an addition to allow an ADU. It just is with that additional time of the director's action.
And so the feeling that you guys have is that that time's required because additions could be proposed that are somehow problematic and really need to be evaluated in context, or, I mean, we're trying to streamline things here. And if that is something that could go through without having to go through director action, which sounds like additional time and expense, then, but you're saying that that is in a different section of the municipal code. It's not before us tonight.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a variety of non-conforming conditions that exist, and so that's why it's in a separate portion of the code, unrelated to kind of ADUs or lot splits. It's just based on if an application comes in and there is a non-conforming condition, right now it's required to go before director's action.
Okay, so maybe we can at least flag that as something worth evaluating in the future as another possible streamlining step that could be enacted. Okay. And process. The tree business was already brought up. This close enough horseshoes and hand grenades 90% idea. Is that anything that has any chance of making it into language tonight, or is that, that's a really tough one to, I'm trying to figure out how you would even.
I feel like there might be some implications with state law and being in compliance with state law with that too.
Yeah, okay. It makes me think of the Princess Bride scene where somebody's just mostly dead. Well, how do you decide something's mostly okay? Okay. And then definition of detached. It sounds like our definition of detached for these ADUs is consistent with the public comment that we heard, where they can be attached to each other, but not to the main house. So that's been resolved. That's all I have. Thanks.
Does anyone feel like crafting a motion?
I'll move that we approve the draft resolution that updates the municipal code title 16 and 17 as presented to us with was there a minor change that was suggested by Ms. Flores? Okay. I'll make that motion.
We have the modifications included in the presentation and staff correspondence, and with the proposed change to the easement recording. language.
Right, yeah, including the staff that would came in through public comment. Thanks.
I'll second. I'd like to, in seconding, I would like to suggest an addition to your resolution, and that is that we consider asking the housing staff to come back at some point in the future, 6 months, a year, and tell us how this worked, in a sense, like what worked well, where were the holdups. I'm not expecting, well, this is the exact average number of days it took to get this permit, but something that really allows us to understand, did we go far enough? Could we go further? What would be your next recommendations? But something we add, actually suggesting a return to the Planning Commission a year from now. I don't know what's a good, I don't want to make a big staff burden about it, but I really have the sense in the way that the staff has really clearly embedded these state laws in this and done a really good job. And it seems like we ought to find out if it works and if it really does speed things up and we can see a difference and keep on it. ADUs are just one of the most important ways we can get some more housing in this town. So that's my thought. You'd have to accept it as the...
Yeah, I don't know if it materially changes what we're approving tonight. It's more of a suggestion to staff, but if that works to include that, what do you say, Tyler?
I mean, I think we are planning to come back every year. We will be back here in a year. We might even be back here before then. So that's just where we're at in terms of the number of changes happening at the state level and just our updates that are needed to stay in compliance. So it's up to the commission.
As the drafter of the original motion, I'll accept that, sure.
Tyler's response. Yeah, I agree. We can just let it go for now, but we'll be interested.
Okay, so we don't have to add anything.
We don't have to add anything.
Okay. All right.
It sounds like we have
I accept that too.
Before vote is taken, could I just get clarification? Is the motion to accept all of the proposed revisions in staff's agenda correspondence?
Yes.
Yes, and also the addition of Commissioner Flores' suggestion about the easement recording language. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call vote?
Vice Chair Houghton,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Tully,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cooley, or I'm sorry, Chair Cooley,
Yes.
and that motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. And again, everyone who's in the audience, you don't have to go home, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to if you want to now. Otherwise, we're going to turn to our staff updates and agenda forecast. Would Deputy Community Development Director Tyler Corey please provide the update?
All right, thank you, Chair Cooley, members of the commission. Looking out to our next regularly scheduled meeting is February 26th. We have 3 items on that meeting night, so it's going to be a pretty good night for the Planning Commission with the general plan annual report. So presentation from staff highlighting all of the advances and status updates to our general plan implementation, from housing to Parks and Rec and open space and water availability. So there's a lot of good information in that report. Next item would be an update we're looking at to the airport area specific plan. And this is to allow mixed use subject to a conditional use permit in the manufacturing and service commercial zones. So that'll be before you that night as well. And then finally, we have a modification to a project at 600 Tank Farm, which is mainly focused on a road design change from a roundabout to a more of a standard intersection at that location. And so 3 projects on for the 26th. And then after that, I'm not totally sure what we're looking at in March just yet. I have some items, but I don't have any clarity yet on what will be scheduled and when. So,
any questions for Tyler or any other present staff?
Yeah, I just have one. On the roundabout on 600 Tank Farm Road, was that the Santa Fe Road, the roundabout plan there?
That's correct.
That's
yeah.
pretty major addition. What type of facility intersection does the city propose, or do we not know yet?
So this is an applicant proposal, and
Okay.
so this will be, we still have to do our analysis and bring that forward, but it's a different design, and it's not proposed to be a roundabout at this time, and I think there's pieces of it that have to do with public right-of-way access.
So are we talking traffic signal?
I believe I'm not sure if there's a signal at that location, but I'd have to take a look at the plans. The report will be out in like a week and a half.
That brings to mind that project, The Link, which sounded like was kind of in either a deep freeze or a chilled out zone. Because that's in that same area, and there was reworking of Tank Farm involved with that, and reworking of Santa Fe, and also the airport's planning to extend the runway north, the main runway there, and that's going to cause a realignment of Santa Fe. So we're aware of all that, right?
We are aware of all that. Currently, the link is not moving forward at this time. It's still on hold pending, I think, some studies that still need to happen with the property owner. But yes, all of those different plans happening and development proposals are all kind of going to be needing to work together and being, in cohesion.
And we still have this roundabouts first policy, is that right? And so we're moving on to second in this situation?
Well, there's a lot more details to get into when that comes on the next agenda.
One more question. Is Prado Road still expected to extend to Broad Street at the Industrial Way intersection?
That is, yes, the Prado is still on the circulation element map to connect from, from the Higuera side all the way over to Broad Street at Industrial. It's actually supposed to be just north of the Damon Garcia sports fields. It actually would align right across from the developments there, the affordable housing developments.
Okay.
Along Broad at that location.
Thank you.
All right, anything else before we wrap it up tonight? All right, the next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled for February 26th, 2025 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at City Hall, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo. We are adjourned.